a very warm welcome to the eucen Open Fora. Actually, the first of two wrap-ups. Today, we would like to have a look at the 4 weeks that we had in the Open Fora, the themes, the issues that came up, and what we maybe can learn from it. And I'm very happy to have the chairs or moderators of these 4 weeks with me today. My name is Eva Cendon. I'm Vice President of eucen, what you can read here, and located in Germany at the Fernuniversität in Hagen. And well, it's my pleasure to lead the discussion or this wrap up today. Well, I start what we have with what we have here, or what we had here. Seeing, you see Balázs Nemet, who was responsible for this first week of the Open Fora, which we had on professional education and adult learning, actually. So very warm welcome, Balázs, to you. We have for the second week, we have Seamus. Thank you very much for jumping in, because you did this week together with Eric Ekbesi, and the topic was transition towards a new world order in new learning strategies. The third person in here is Timo Haltunen, who was chairing the third week of the Open Fora, which was about designing flexible learning for adults, dialogue between university lifelong learning and professional contexts. And last but not least, Kevin Orr, who was chairing the last week, diversity and inclusion in higher education, what we have and what we need. So very warm welcome to my 4 colleagues. And what I would like today is to see what we, as I said before, what we could learn from these weeks. We have our, I would say, the theme that is like an umbrella for all our Open Fora this year is the contemporary issues in university lifelong learning. And so I would like to see what we could what we can see maybe as overall topics from all these weeks. For all the colleagues who are here to listen and who participating, I think that some of you have heard quite a lot of the last weeks. So of course you are also welcome if you have some issues or questions to post them in the chat. I will try to have a look. But in first place, I would like to have a first round with our colleagues. I've prepared some questions maybe that could help us to learn a bit more, even if you did not participate in each of the weeks. So I tried to start with Balázs already with you. And so my first question actually to all of you is, what are your central learnings of your week? What was very surprising for you when you were chairing this week? What was maybe not expected? And Balázs, I may give you the word for the topic adult learning.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
I think something was very much obvious, and I think it is not a surprise to you that we have still a lot to do in the development of the profession of adult educators. For many reasons, and I think it was very important to keep it on track. It was a little bit of intentional from me at a time of UNESCO is preparing for Confinter 7, and together with Seamus we have heard a number of things, but I think many of you also did it, what it would be very much necessary is that higher education institutions keep on moving with the research and development of these professional orientations. And I think this is something very much relevant to us. And this is what we heard from the keynote, but also from presenters during the week, that there is a kind of expectation on the universities from practitioners that we keep on moving. But not only to research, but also to reflect on some challenging aspects of professional developments. And this is what it made us to look back on our recent past, but also to have a good overview what could be potentially be incorporated in this kind of thing. What is the skill? What are the skills of a new of adult educators, trainers, mentors, facilitators in this changing world with lots of digitalization orientation? You know, we have this topic of digital learning across Europe in many senses. So I think we could collect and share some fairly important matters. And it really wanted to emphasize that UCAN has, for a number of reasons, it is also kind of historical that we have understood commonly that university lifelong learning has a lot to do to develop adult and lifelong learning, and to make it really intergenerational. I think we could really highlight this. This is what I can say. Anything challenging or surprising? Not really. But still, I think we do know who are those key institutions, or I would say not leading, but significant institutions across Europe who provide us universities research work in this field. And I think we should emphasize furthermore on comparative studies, which is, in my understanding, the key message from the week. Thank you very much, Eva, indeed.
Thank you, Balázs. So I take it was on the one hand the professionalization of adult learning, but also adult educators, but also the professionalization of adult learning at universities.
Yes.
So I understood it. Okay, just
both.
to get that right, because I think it's both ways then. So it's
Absolutely. And when we talk about these things very much interrelated, it was another kind of signal. What do we think about quality instruments? There are quite a number. There are quite a number, but I think these are very much interrelated to connecting between participation and learning performance. So I think this is something that we have tried to indicate. And finally, that those significant experiences of universities ought to be collected and shared through UCAN as an academic platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to move on to week 2. Seamus, knowing that you were just responsible for half of the week, but for me, the most interesting part, and I was not able to be at one of the meetings of this week, or the fora of this week, was the new world order. So even if it's on learning strategies, so maybe you can give us some maybe unexpected, or for you maybe surprising issues from this week that for you were outstanding maybe for this week. Thank you.
I'm not sure that they're particularly surprising, but I think our week more or less coincided or was very close to the UNESCO Learning Cities Conference in South Korea. And the big surprise for me was the statement that came from that conference was, to me, very disappointing, because they allowed the lifelong learning agenda to be captured by COVID. And they to me became very kind of inward looking and concentrated almost exclusively on the idea of health. And when you read the statement from there, it reads like a WHO statement. And if you read the previous statements from the Medellin, from Cork, from Mexico, and Beijing, they were much more about inclusivity, about the real project of lifelong learning, And, you know, the idea of that no one should be left behind, and thinking about how we can include people, how we can tackle climate, migration, and all these other kinds of issues. And so for me, it was important, I suppose, in our week that we didn't get captured in the same web, because yes, of course, COVID is dominating all our lives now, but let's hope it's not going to dominate all our lives forever. And we need to keep a focus on the things that were important before COVID are still important. They haven't gone away, they haven't disappeared. And I think it's incumbent on us as adult educators, people involved in lifelong learning, to keep people's minds open and for us to see the world. And I suppose, to me, three things are as important now as they were before COVID, and remained important through our week. I think the whole issue of climate and the challenges around climate change are substantial and very, 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 very pressing. And COP26 was on more or less the same time as well. So that was very much on the agenda for during our week. But it is so critically important. The other issue, which was quite prominent in our week, was the whole issue around migration. And they're not unrelated, but there are huge challenges in relation to migration. You know, we're seeing all of these all of the time. And the third one for me that's really important is what I would describe as reflexivity, reflexive modernity. And here I'm, you know, concerned about things like identity and how people identify themselves, how they understand who they are. And the challenge for us is to enable people to explore the dimensions of their own identity in a way that liberates them and does not confine them and does not restrict them. And, you know, for me, those are really critical challenges. And we talked about resilience, but resilience is in all of those things. So for me, I suppose the kind of surprising thing, I suppose, was the message coming from UNESCO, which was a little bit disappointing, and the message that was coming from COP26, which was extremely urgent. And in the midst of that, we already had a lot of other issues and problems that we needed to be addressing, and was just trying to keep a focus on all of those. So they were my quick thoughts.
Thank you very much, Seamus. So I take especially the issue of resilience with all, I would say, societal and societal issues that we are dealing with, actually, with the climate change, the migration topics, and the issue about the identities.
Just one comment here. I think this is a very serious situation right here. But I think higher education institutions should indicate, like UCAN should indicate, that we might want to emphasize the importance to bridge in between intergovernmental platforms and non-governmental bodies, because in this way, and I do agree with Seamus, UNESCO is not everything, and these recent orientation of some governments to deforming the arguments and discussions around learning cities, learning communities. Of course, it is urgent, but this is not the only scope, and we should not lose the integrative focuses, approaches to the matter of community-based learning, the formation of learning communities. Otherwise, again, it is very much rendered to some very much, I would say, consumptionist views that, well, learning and development of skills is only job related. And this is the only stake that we have to serve. So I think this is something very much necessary to highlight here. And we shared this throughout the week, that these matters lead members of communities, individuals, communities in the localities to learn for a better world they want to make. And I think we learned through this second week a lot about this kind.
Balázs, unfortunately, you're frozen now, but I think we'll come back on the issues that you raised, because we have still some some minutes for that to go deeper in the issues. And I think you already raised two topics, which is one was about the job-related topics, and the other was about the issue also about inclusiveness. And we had both in this month with the colleagues. So I would rather have the round ready, come back then to the topics again, and ask now Timo, because this was week 3 and this was about adult learning, but with the issue of, I would say, workplace or job-related issues. So maybe you can give us some insight on the most surprising facts at that point.
Sure, thank you, Eva. And like you said, the topic of the week was flexibility and how universities are able to move into that direction of more flexibility for adult learners and their work communities. And maybe related what Balázs just said in a way, so how we can facilitate that kind of more intense collaboration between workplaces or even professional associations. And during this week, we had really quite different perspectives, one from UNESCO, one from a higher education institution and the management, then a view from the United States about how to really design a framework for more flexible adult learning structures and offerings. And then a really different view from Africa, from a very small country next to South Africa, Eswatini or Swaziland, about how university students were able to maneuver their work during the times of pandemic and all these struggles. So there was one view from with well-resourced university being able to do flexibility, and a university with really a lack of resources, how to increase flexibility. But maybe the most surprising finding was in a way that how we were able to think outside the box during these pandemic times, that we were all stuck with the routines and the way we have always done, but the pandemic really changed the game into a new direction, that we just had to be innovative and inventive and kind of like get rid of the old structures to just basically offer good quality content to our learners when we couldn't see them. Then another finding was really that even though we have done quite a lot of projects and development on online learning or technology enhanced learning, so all these quality assurance structures for quality assurance specifically for technology enhanced learning, so they are still missing at large. So maybe those were kind of like the two findings in a way, that we were quite able, considering these exceptional times and all the stress, to be innovative and changing our ways of doing. But in a way, it was also maybe a pity to find out that all of these investments on the structures of quality and so on, so they are still kind of like ignoring maybe the learning online.
Thank you very much, Timo. So it also, what I heard here was also, again, the issue of quality assurance, but also with the topic of what does this mean in new online environments, even when it's about professional or like university adult education that goes in direction of professions maybe. So there is this issue, and maybe with that we come to the fourth topic because Kevin, you had the pleasure of the last week and about the big topic of inclusion and diversity in higher education. So what we get and what we need to do. So maybe you want to give us some of your surprises of this week.
Sure. Again, I'm not sure what surprises there are, but allow me to come back to that and to pick up a point that Seamus has made, that our starting point was COVID, but that COVID has exposed what we kind of knew was already there and has exacerbated what was already there. So COVID has allowed us to think perhaps and to see inequality within our societies that perhaps was more hidden before, but they're not caused by COVID, but they have been exacerbated by it. I think what came out of the discussions that we had over the week were that understandings of what we mean by diversity and inclusion differ quite considerably from place to place. And I think that that is probably right, because these terms are relative terms depending upon the societies that we are discussing. So one of the days we had a discussion around the term non-traditional student, and that this is a term that its meaning changes from one situation to another. And indeed, thinking about where many of us teach, the idea of a non-traditional student being a student who is first generation at university, that may exist for the moment, but actually in 10 or 15 years' time, that will not be the case. So what will be a non-traditional student then may have altered. So I think that these terms are relative, quite rightly so, and therefore the kind of response to improving diversity and to enhancing inclusion within higher education institutions particularly needs to be local, if you like. It was also clear that the status quo is quite different from place to place. That was brought up during the week. But we were struck, I think, by the very wide range of projects that there have been that are associated with inclusion, and that are ongoing. Indeed, UCAN have been involved in many of them. We've been involved in many of these, but that they need kind of local inflection to be successful. And then that brings us on to what I think was an important question, and one on which I wish I could answer, which is, what does successful look like? How do you know that these particular interventions or projects are successful? How do we gauge success? How is it measured? So we had some discussion, for example, about the measurement of ethnicity and socioeconomic background and parental income, parental employment, and so on, as a way of measuring the baseline to see where people might go afterwards, and whether that's a good thing or not. Similarly, do we measure success by what is input or by the outcomes? And going back to something Balázs has said, you know, how much should that be linked to employment? That seems a rather narrow understanding of what success is in these grounds. But I would also argue that it has something to say. I think what was most powerful, though, perhaps in a week that I found altogether very powerful, was the experience on Friday of two women who had migrated to Ireland from Africa, from Uganda and from Nigeria, and to hear about their experience of navigating the system successfully, but how many people are not successful. You know, a combination of good fortune and wherewithal allowed them to get through it. But that was a reminder of just how difficult it can be for individuals to navigate a system, even a system which in many respects was trying to help them. So if you like, that it humanized what we've been talking about all week.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I need to say once that we have, for the COVID-19, I see that now coming in all your contributions on the one hand as accelerator, but also as I would maybe, I don't know, Seamus, if it's the right word, but also covering other issues by just how would you say? I have no better word, you know, excuse my English, but, you know, not seeing other things. So in my second round, and maybe, I don't know who wants to start on that, I would like to ask what you were seeing or experiences in this week. What does this mean? I think you already had some of you already had a bit of a start on that. But what does that mean actually for universities and for university lifelong learning? Also in this, I would say, in this field of on the one hand, like serving society, but also distancing itself from society things, or like not following the things that need to be done at the moment. So I don't know if you get my ways, but also to see where we need to be resilient, maybe as university in our approaches. So I don't know, Seamus, maybe you would like to start, because you made so clear that the big surprise was not a nice one, you know, on this topic. So where do we need to go actually as universities, and what can we do or what needs to be done?
Well, maybe refer back to a point that Kevin just made there about the two women from Africa navigating a system that's somehow designed to help them, but in some ways can be a kind of a trap. And so many of the systems we create ostensibly are there to help people, but they become ways of trapping them or diverting them from what their primary goals are or whatever, you know. And I think this is a massive challenge. And universities, in some senses, I think, have lost their sense of autonomy, their sense of changing the world. They've become somewhat obsessed with financing themselves, league tables, and all of these kinds of things. And at some level, they've sort of forgotten the idea that they can be sort of leaders in thought creation and taking risks, you know. I mean, if human beings didn't take risks, we would still be where we started from, you know. We wouldn't have created any civilizations, or we would have done nothing really. So taking risks are really important, and I suppose dealing with risk is important. And as adult educators, it's part of our mission to enable people to take risks, and that when they take risks, that we're not trying to capture them or trying to corral them into a certain space or tell them that the only thing is, you know, skills or whatever, you know. And I genuinely think that is a massive challenge for us, to do our things in a way that allows people to be autonomous. And I think we're going to have to break, you know, they saying you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Well, we need to make some omelets, and we're going to have to break a lot of eggs, because we're still fixated with degrees and master's degrees and PhDs and all these other ways of shaping qualifications. And we're stuck with the idea that, you know, people can become experts in a specific field or a specific discipline and these sorts of things. And they're not always what people need, or they're not always what people want or what people desire. And we need to be more open to processes of co-designing with people, giving people more options within what we do. And, you know, we also need to accept a little bit of humility and say we actually don't know everything. We know little enough, and that the people we deal with know an awful lot more than we ever give them credit for. So yeah, so that's my little contribution. Maybe it's not what you're expecting, but I'm a little bit frustrated by universities. And you can see what's in my background. So
no, but Seamus, thank you very much for that, because I think that was important, and I would like to go two directions with this and the issue of autonomy, and what could be the autonomy students and the co-designing of learning processes. Because what struck me, and Kevin, I'm coming back to you, was the issue of non-traditional student. I was a bit like, I learned in the UK context, at least in the context of widening participation, do not talk about non-traditional students, because that makes them, they are not the traditional ones, you know, so a bit like, you know, they're a bit the others. And maybe this was also, Seamus, when you were saying, you know, we want to help people, but not, sometimes this is also a trap, you know, because, and be it like, because we put them in some boxes and say, well, you're not the not traditional one, you are the female one, you are the whatever, you're my diverse student. So maybe Kevin, coming back to that, you know, and the inclusion part, what do you think, where could universities go from maybe some of the issues or some learnings from this week? What could be ways of dealing with inclusion?
Okay,
in university lifelong learning, sorry, point.
Yeah, absolutely. So allow me to consider that at various levels. I firmly believe that individual educators, people like us, can make a difference to individual students in the way that we welcome them, or indeed the way that we repel them from our classes. So people like us make a difference. Similarly, I think it's important, and this came up during the week, it's not just academic staff. Non-academic staff in universities can make a real difference as to whether people feel welcomed or not. So even with the status quo, even as things are, we can make a difference for the better or for the worse. Similarly, institutional policy, our institutions, I'm sure all of our institutions have got very good on paper or on screen diversity policies of one sort or another, and I'm glad that those exist. But if individuals don't follow those policies, well, they're not worth having. But nonetheless, I think it's important that institutions buy into this. However, I think, and this is my view of what came out during the week, and others may have a different view, but it did strike me that policy, I mean national political policy, is tremendously important. Because certainly within the United Kingdom, especially the English scenario, universities compete, and they compete in a way that is set out by policymakers in relation to funding and so on, which has the effect, it's not the purpose, but has the effect of marginalizing continuing education, because undergraduate students, traditional, if I can use that term, undergraduate students, are weighted more heavily in terms of the various algorithms. So policy really matters. And therefore, if policymakers are truly interested, as they say they are, in continuing education, then the incentives for universities need to be different. So by saying policy needs to change is not letting people like me off the hook. We can make a difference today, but actually if you want to see something more structural, the incentives that universities have need to alter in order for universities to compete differently than they do at the moment, or to behave differently because of competition as they do at the moment.
Thank you very much also for bringing in the policy level at that, you know, the measures and the things that we of course are measured against as universities. I think we have two ways now. One would go to the issue of learning itself and what that means for learning for autonomy. And here I look at Balázs and about the issue of adult learning. So maybe you want to share something on this, not going to the micro, but to the question of pedagogy, how we deal with, you know, treating adults as adults in university lifelong learning. And I may give you the floor on that, and then we come to the professional roots. Balázs.
Yeah, I think this is, can you hear me? I think this is something that has a perspective, necessary layer in retrospective, that a little bit more than 100 years ago, some universities across Europe and academic people around decided to take a social responsibility to move out to the public, like university extension, or like what happened in Germany through the movement of the Urania and several other things in many other countries. I think this is still in a certain way, very much necessary to highlight the social responsibility and commitment of universities to keep a good dialogue going on within the society. And I think when we have Pat here with us, I think you have highlighted so many times this important social policy role of higher education, that university lifelong learning should really lead the dialogue on embracing a certain culture of lifelong learning, in a sense that we have a word to be heard based on research, based on analytical work, but also connecting theory to practice. And when Eva is asking about how to deal with adults, I think in higher education, we learn with adults. We just don't necessarily teach. We also learn, and we are being shaped by adult members of our own communities who want to share with us things. However, in this world again of today, and this is what I was reminded by, for example, especially about the topic of the week coordinated by Kevin, is that when you talk about inclusion, you have to provide good and reliable and legitimate examples, public examples, that you just don't talk, you just act. And I think this is again a very important message of the day, that inclusion for universities should mean equitable access to science and scientifically led rational knowledge construction. I think this is very much important, that we try to address university lifelong learning is about accessible, quality, scientifically based knowledge. However, I think this is also a matter, and that's my last junction here, is to represent and demonstrate social sensitivity and solidarity with those who are in difficult situations. Otherwise, we just don't fulfill our public role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Balázs. I pick actually your point up on the issue. So now, no, I'm lost. Sorry. I wanted to pick up because, and this goes in your direction, Timo, about the issue of what Balázs also said on the question of we learn with adults, and the issue that Annalisa was also putting forward, this idea of non-formal education and the issues of picking up, getting access and opportunities. So with your view on the week and the topic of professional learning and the flexible learning path, what should universities do with that?
Thank you for a quite difficult question. I think it really is about setting oneself into dialogue with the participants, whether they are adult learners as individuals or companies. And during the week, there was a viewpoint of management in higher education, where the finding was that when a university and the staff members there get into this kind of like dialogue with the companies, so of course that takes some time and to develop trust, but by little you gain such valuable information that after that you are able to renew the competence profiles of a certain profession. But this doesn't really happen by itself, like Balázs was also mentioning. From the individual level, and maybe what was discussed about resilience, or even what Kevin mentioned about widening participation. So I would agree that in a way we shouldn't romanticize this phenomenon of widening participation. So, for example, in the perspective provided by the speaker from the United States, she mentioned that quite a large number of their students are adult learners. They are with children. They have multiple jobs. So in a way, these people shouldn't be seen as exotic, but we really need to cater for them with real educational offerings that are meeting their needs. So instead of really like having this talk like Bala said that nice to have you here and nice to have you here, we really need to have an understanding that how we can make our learning opportunities available for them. And maybe they need some bridging studies if they have a different kind of a background, or all kinds of little helpings here and there are actually needed. And it takes like a systematic thought how to make them available. So I think there was quite a lot of resonance what was discussed earlier about that too. Then there was an example on Friday from our colleague from eucen, Alfredo, who had the perspective of engineering and the professional associations in engineering, and many others have similar kinds of competence profiles that other fields could maybe benefit from. So it is a very systematic, ongoing development of competencies. So maybe there, if we need to find some way of scalable solutions, so we could learn from those fields that have been doing this for years.
Thank you, Timo. I mean, I need to be a bit provocative here, because when you're saying, well, bridging courses, well, we need to make them like that they can deal with university. And actually that was my learning from this week, also from Kevin's week, when it was about all, well, we have bridging courses, we let the peoples in, we try to bring them in, but then they have a normal study as all students have, where we expect they come directly from school, they don't have work experience, and they follow our full and normal studies. So, so what? What about the new image of students? What does that mean for diversity? What does that mean for inclusion? I ask you here. So maybe you have some final ideas on that. I need to pick on that, sorry. Who would like to have a start on that?
I think one of the problems is that the people organizing the inclusion aren't very diverse themselves.
So we need more diversity within the staff, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting when you mentioned about earlier, Eva, about the entire staff complement. When I was an undergraduate student, the main department, my sociology department, was sort of my kind of home department, and the department was located in an old building, an old house that was converted into offices and so on and so forth. And at the time, the university employed I can't remember what they called them exactly, but there was a person who kind of took care of the building. They cleaned the place and they did different bits and pieces. But in this particular department, it was a woman called Sheila Murphy. And Sheila Murphy cleaned the place and so on and so forth. And she would make tea if there was visitors and things like this. But she had a tiny little room in this building. And when a student would come to the department and maybe they got their essay result and they failed or something like this, and then they're coming out of the office crying and they're upset. Well, where did they go? They went into Sheila's little office. She sat them down and she made a cup of tea, and they had tea and a biscuit and a chat. And she said, it's not the end of the world. It's a bad result in an essay. And, even if you don't get your degree or whatever, it's not the end of the world either. And they had a chat for 10 or 15 minutes and off they went and so on. And of course, because universities have to cut costs and they have to prioritize what the important things are to get rid of these people. You know? But of course they put in some other very formal structures to deal with the kinds of things. So they have maybe counselors or something like that, and the student has to wait for 3 weeks for the counselor because they don't have enough counselors. You know, so it's sometimes, you know, we try to fix the problem and we actually break it, you know, maybe, you know, I think maybe getting to national stereotypes here now a little bit, but Irish people are chaotic in some ways. So we don't do things in a very organized and structured way, or so it would seem on the outside. But there is kind of a method to our madness, and it's the madness is our method, and there needs to be more madness in the method. We need to be doing things, you know, less in boxes and ticking boxes and saying, no, I've ticked 5 to 7 boxes, so I'm a really good person and I'm doing all the things. And I can't remember which one of you said about inputs and outputs, you know. And again, I think we're in a confused and crazy world there because we don't know which it is we're measuring or which it is important. So I think in some ways we need to, and maybe COVID has taught us this, actually, we need to recapture some of the craziness in terms of how we do things, the informality, the flexibilities, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings, and they are the things that are important for human beings. You know, whether the person is, you know, come from Africa or come from Hungary or Finland or England or wherever they're from, they're, at the end of the day, they're all human beings, and they need a human touch and a human connection, you know. So I think, you know, we sometimes get a little bit removed from that in terms of our policies.
Thank you very much, Seamus, on that, on the craziness. I think this were already like the message you would like to give on the
as bad as the Irish.
The Irish way, and we learned a lot about the Irish rugby team here in the chat too. I would give the colleagues also the possibility to give me a short, important message. How do we get out of this box, actually, of having, you know, maybe good access, but then standard studies? How can we be more inclusive? How can we use university lifelong learning actually for broader participation, for using flexible learning path, and for getting that within the university, not only within our like fringe, our departments at the fringe, but in the center. So who has another good idea? Please, colleagues.
just one more political, more value-based thing is that within universities, we should not simply just support political to hijack welfare orientations. I think this is the world where a number of governments try to enforce higher education institutions to simply follow economic priorities. And in today's world, when you know there is this wide discourse of the futures of education, we should also consider our own future about perspective. This is what I think is that it needs more reflection, clear voice, public discourse, critical insight. And I think this what we have to address very openly and clearly about how to balance in between quality, scientific advancements, and social benefits and inclusion. I do agree with one remark in the chat: we are not inclusive enough. So we have to start with self-criticism. and a kind of reconfiguration of what higher education may be demanded by the public. We don't necessarily hear the voice of our own people within the universities, whether they themselves are satisfied with the organization or dialogue, what university, the people working within higher education may want. You just mentioned that it is important to make university lifelong learning, but what about a lifelong learning university? Addressing matters of how to develop as a good community, that people want to talk, to make interdisciplinary, to make the university to be a good place to be. So in my understanding, we are very close to each other, but sometimes we are very, very far away. So this is interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Balázs, also for bringing in the idea of the lifelong learning university, which would bring university lifelong learning actually at the heart of the university, which is another way of deal with it and not talking about fringes and centers, that point. So famous last words now from Kevin and from Timo. Please try to be quick.
Okay, well, if I may start, I will be quick. I mean, my lasting memory from last week will be that universities can still occasionally transform lives. Even as they can transform lives, open up perspectives that people didn't have before, make people feel powerful about themselves in a way that they didn't beforehand. And that is worth achieving. And I suppose as educators, we don't know which students are going to have that kind of that experience. And therefore we must try our best individually all of the time. But I think that the kind of broader questions are for us, not just as academics, but as campaigners. And I think picking up the kind of questions and the kind of points that Balázs was making, it strikes me the question is, what is the purpose of universities, including lifelong learning? And I think that question is a moral question. And I think it's one that we should answer in moral terms rather than economic terms, as so often it is answered at the moment. Once we can agree on the morality of education, then we can discuss how we can best make that kind of education work. But I think that let's hang on first of all. This is a moral question, not just an economic question.
Thank you very much for this statement, and I may give the word to Timo.
What else is there to say after this powerful speech? But I think you mentioned earlier about what are the real changes that we are able to make in our educational process. So I think there are also recent trends like the micro-credentials, so more modular content that is available for different kinds of learners. So in a way, those are like the bite-sized learnings that can be consumed. So maybe there are also developments like that, but we must write into those developments the lifelong learning. So easily it is forgotten and they just become splitting bigger modules into smaller modules without any innovative bits and pieces there, unless we are really, there to guard this idea of the lifelong learner or the non-formal and informal content also. So I think there's really much for us to do in UCAN to keep these discourses up and alive, and also being able to communicate them clearly to decision makers.
Thank you very much for that, Timo. I take 4 words for the end of this of our discussion that I think we should take with us, and I think these are things that we should try to work within UCAN with the colleagues and our members on different levels, be it policy, be it in research with our projects, and being it in developing at our programs. I think one is, and that I start with what you said, Timo, the valuing of what students bring with them in the very different manners they bring it. It could be like micro-credentials, could be other forms, but to value what they have and to work with that and to not like put it aside and say, now you start anew. The second is, I think, the most difficult, because of course is the transforming part that you said, Kevin. We hope to transform our students, but the ways, I mean, we just can go on the way, and we never know in the end what will be the outcome with like this, you know. So, but I think this is something to make learning a transformational experience, and I think this is a second important point. I would go on with the critical thinking ballast that you put in. You know, this is also like not going with along the lines of utilities or things that are necessary, but really to distance, to reflect, to be critical of things, and that we get our university or our lifelong learners to support them with that. And the last point, and I just love it. I think the Austrians are close to the Irish in that the craziness we need to bring in, and the craziness that helps us survive on the one hand side, but on the other hand side also to do some changes within our institutions. And I'm quite sure that we do that. And even if they are on sometimes not so good visible as we think they are, but I think it's worth trying, and it helps us not to get crazy if you have the craziness already in there. So I may thank you very much for this discussion. I hope that we also brought out some new points apart from what we summarized or what we pointed out from the sessions we had in the last weeks. I think it's contemporary, and looking also at Pat, I think the issues are so old partly, but we readdress them. And I think it's just also one part of not stopping, readdressing them. So thank you very much for the discussions. Thank you, colleagues. And I may give the last word to Carmen, because there is one more session missing, which will be tomorrow. And Carmen, where are you?
I'm here, but I
we
only
can't
want.
See.
Oh, that's good. It's good.
Okay.
Don't worry, but my voice is there. I'm like, God. No, it's only a joke. I only wanted to explain that tomorrow we have the pleasure to have Pusa Nastase with us. She will present a little bit to our next conference, which will hopefully take place in Budapest, 8th-10th June 2022. And Balázs will be our moderator tomorrow. And I invite you all, please, to join us if you want to know more about what is happening next June. So that was all I wanted to explain.
Thank you very much, Carmen. So join us tomorrow. We still hope, and we do not hope. We are sure that we meet each other finally next year in Budapest, which is really high time after all this time online. And I may thank you just to make this point here, to thank all the moderators of the 4 weeks of the Open Fora for their investment, for their time, for their getting hold of all people. I want to thank all of the people who did present cases, who gave master classes. I think some of them are here. Thank you very much for your input, which enriched our discussion today. And I may thank you to all of those who were listening, discussing with us from all over the world in these 4 weeks. So thank you very much. Looking forward to see you tomorrow so that you hear more about Budapest next year face to face. Have a good afternoon, a good morning, or a good evening. Bye.